Hi you guys, today we are going to be starting your integers module, and before you move any further with this video, I want you to make sure that you have this integers guided notes packet right in front of you, okay? You also need something to write with. Remember that as you watch these videos, I want you participating. If I ask you to practice something, please do that. Remember that the learning in this class is what is important. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and start by talking about what is an integer. Now, we have talked about this a little bit in this class. We talked about it when we were learning how to classify real numbers. An integer is basically all of the whole numbers and their opposites, including 0. Okay? Notice that when we talk about integers, we're talking about whole numbers. So there are no fractions and no decimals included in the set of integers. Okay? So integers are whole numbers, they're opposites, and integers do include 0. As we look at this number line here, we can see that the numbers to the right of 0 are positive and the numbers to the left of 0 are negative. We can also see that as we move to the right on the number line, the numbers increase in value. Just like as we move to the left on the number line, the numbers decrease in value. So that means that -3 is of less value than -2. -2 is of less value than -1. There are lots of real-world situations that can be represented by integers. So we're going to take a look at these words or phrases, and then we are going to come up with the opposite of that word or phrase. So I want you to push pause. Try and see if you can come up with the opposite of each of these on your own, and then push play and see if you got them correct. Okay, so above sea level. This would be represented by a positive integer, and the opposite of that word or phrase would be below sea level. And anytime we're talking about below sea level, that would be represented by a negative integer. Okay, the next one, gain. That would be represented by a positive integer anytime there is a gain. And the opposite of that would be a loss. And a loss is always represented by a negative integer. The next one, deposit. So the opposite word or phrase for deposit, we know that if we deposit money, like into a bank account or something, if we make a deposit, that is adding to, and that would be positive. And then the opposite of that would be withdraw. Okay, so deposit would be putting money in. That would be represented by a positive integer. Withdrawing, that would be taking money out. That would be represented by a negative integer. Okay, the next one is to earn money. Earning money would be represented by a positive integer, and then spending money, that would be represented by a negative integer. The next one, credit, that would be represented by a positive integer, and then a debit, that is when you are spending money. Okay, so that would be a negative integer. Rise would be a positive integer. The opposite of rise is fall. Ascend, that's a word or phrase that we could use that would be represented by a positive integer. And then descend is the opposite of that, and that would be a negative integer. And then profit would be a positive integer, and then a loss. That would be represented by a negative integer. So hopefully you got all of these correct, because for this next activity, we are going to take these situations and we are going to write an integer to represent each of the situations. And you're going to see some of the words that we saw just a minute ago on these A through T. So A, a debt of $10. If we wanted to use an integer to represent that, if it's a debt, that's going to be negative. So a debt of $10 would be negative 10. A gain of 15 yards would be positive 15. 20 feet below sea level. Remember, below sea level, that's represented by a negative integer. So the integer for that would be negative 20. 2 points extra credit. That would be a positive 2. A deposit of $200. Remember, depositing money, that's represented by a positive integer. So that would be positive 200. 4 degrees below freezing in degrees Celsius. So if we are below freezing, that's going to be represented by a negative integer. So 4 degrees below freezing in degrees Celsius. A savings account earns $60.30 in interest. And so this one right here is actually not an integer. It's a rational number, but it's the same principle that we've been following for all these other ones. For H, Tyler earned $5 for cleaning his mom's car. That would be positive 5. A $20 credit on a gift card. That would be positive 20. A stock price fell 33 cents. So if the stock price fell, that would be a negative 0.33 cents. A loss of 150, so that would be a negative 150. A fine of $50. Now, if you're getting a fine of $50, that's something that you have to pay. That's like a bill. So that would be a negative 50. The line of scrimmage. Now, I don't know football very well. I think this would be 0. Some of you may have to correct me on that one. Some of you football players, I know that I have a lot of you in my classes. So help me out with this one. Tell me if the line of scrimmage would be 0. Okay, and the freezing point of water in degrees Celsius. Okay, so maybe some of you know this. I actually had to look this up. And then when I looked it up, I was like, oh yeah, I knew that. So the freezing point of water is a positive 32 degrees Celsius. The opposite of a debt of $25. Now, this one's a little bit tricky because it says the opposite of a debt of $25. So if you have a debt of $25, that's going to be a negative 25, and then the opposite of that. So the opposite of a debt of $25 would actually be a positive 25 for the integer. Okay? The opposite of a loss of 7 yards. So if you have a loss of 7 yards, the integer is going to look like that. And then the opposite of a loss would actually be positive 7. The opposite of 5 degrees above 0. Okay, so if we're 5 degrees above 0, and then we do the opposite of that, the integer would actually be a negative 5. The opposite of a withdrawal of $100. Okay, so if it's a withdrawal of $100, that's going to be negative 100. And then the opposite of a negative 100 would be a positive 100. The opposite of a rise of 20 feet. So if it's a rise of 20 feet, that's going to be positive 20. But then the opposite of positive 20 would actually be a negative 20. And then the last one, the opposite of 15 feet below sea level. So if it's 15 feet below sea level, that would be a negative integer. So the opposite of negative 15 would actually be a positive 15. Okay? Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to here is every time you see this opposite and then a negative together here, an opposite and a negative. An opposite of a negative is always going to give you something that is positive. Okay, so I just want you to start paying attention to that. Okay, so a lot of you probably knew that the freezing point of water was 32 degrees Celsius. I actually had to look that one up. So let's look at O, the opposite of a debt of $25. Now, these ones are a little bit tricky. if there is a debt of $25, that's going to be a negative 25. But then the opposite of a negative 25 would be a positive 25. Okay, the opposite of a negative 25 is a positive 25. For P, the opposite of a loss of 7 yards. So if it's a loss of 7 yards, that's going to be negative 7, but the opposite of that, the opposite of a negative 7 would be a positive 7. Q, the opposite of 5 degrees above 0. If it's 5 degrees above 0, that's going to be positive 5, but then the opposite of a positive 5 would be a negative 5. Okay, let's look at R. The opposite of a withdrawal of $100. So if there's a withdrawal of $100, that's going to be a negative 100, but then the opposite of that would actually be a positive 100. The opposite of a rise of 20 feet, so the rise of 20 feet would be positive. The opposite of that would be negative 20. And then the last one, the opposite of 15 feet below sea level. So if it's 15 feet below sea level, we would represent that with a negative integer. And then the opposite of that, the opposite of negative 15, would be positive 15. Now, as you look through these, I want you to pay careful attention that whenever you're doing the opposite of a negative, you always end up with a positive answer. Okay, you can see the opposite of a negative gave us a positive answer. The opposite of a negative gave us a positive answer. The opposite of a negative gave us a positive answer. Okay. Now, what I would like you to do is on your guided notes packet, you have these exact same questions. So I want you to do these questions. So push pause, complete these questions, and then push play and see if you got them correct. Okay, and here are the answers. So go through and correct yours. See if there are any that you missed. Remember that if you missed something and you're not sure why, at this point, go ahead and push pause and come back and ask me. Let me help you figure out why you got it wrong, or let me help you figure out the thing that you don't understand. Okay, so now that you've corrected these, let's go ahead and move forward in the video. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is I want you to complete activity 1. You can see that it says use the following information about the picture below to answer the questions that follow. So the bird is flying 15 feet above the surface of the water. So you are actually going to need to draw the bird in on the picture that's on the right-hand column of your notes guide. The bird didn't actually copy over correctly. So go ahead on the right-hand column of your notes guide, draw the bird in 15 feet above the surface of the water. Okay, so draw a bird, and then you are going to label it as a positive 15. Okay, it's 15 feet above the surface. Now the scuba diver is 30 feet below the surface. The clownfish is 15 feet below the surface. This one's the clownfish right here. The swordfish, which is this one right here, okay, the swordfish is 34 feet below the surface of the water, and the sea turtle is 44 feet below the surface of the water. So this right here is the surface of the water. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at what you need to do for this activity. So for part A, next to each object, write a number to represent the elevation of each object if the surface of the water is at sea level. So if the surface of the water is at sea level, we're going to say the integer for that would be 0. After you have completed A, where you've taken these and you've labeled everything on the picture with its location, you are going to then answer questions B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and K. So go ahead and push pause complete this activity, and then push play and see if you got it correct. Okay, so the scuba diver is at 30 feet. You should have had that. Below sea level, so that should be negative 30. The clownfish is 15 feet below sea level. So here's our clownfish, negative 15 feet below sea level. The swordfish is negative 34 feet below sea level, okay? Because it's below sea level, the integer would be negative 44. And then the sea turtle is negative 44 because it's 44 feet below the surface of the water. For B, it says which object is at the highest elevation. And for that one, you should have said the bird. The bird is out of the water, okay? It's at the highest elevation. It is flying 15 feet above the surface of the water. The lowest elevation would be the sea turtle at negative 44. Which object is closest to sea level? For that one, you could say that both the bird and the clownfish are the exact same distance away from sea level, because the bird is flying 15 feet above sea level, but the clownfish is flying 15 feet below sea level. So they are both 15 feet. Okay, so from 0 to negative 15 is 15, and from 0 to positive 15 is also 15. Okay, so you should have said the bird and the clownfish on that one. And then farthest from sea level, that should have been the sea turtle. Okay, which object or objects are less than 32 feet from sea level? Okay, so this one was a little bit tricky, I think. If we look at the swordfish and the turtle, those are 34 feet away from sea level and 44 feet away from sea level. And so the objects that are less than 32 feet away from sea level would be the scuba diver. The scuba diver is only 30 feet away from sea level. The clownfish is only 15 feet away from sea level. And the bird is only 15 feet away from sea level. Okay, next question. Which is further from sea level, the bird or the swordfish? So further from sea level would have to be the swordfish, because the swordfish is 34 feet away from sea level. Okay, next question. Complete the following statements. The bird is 15 feet above sea level. The elevation of the bird can be represented by the number positive 15. Complete the following statements for G. The swordfish is 34 feet below sea level. The elevation of the swordfish can be represented by the number negative 34. Which two objects are equidistant from the surface of the water? And we said that is the bird and the clownfish. Add your own object that is farther from sea level than any of the other objects shown. Okay, well, you could have added below sea level. You could have added an object at down here at 55 feet below sea level. Some sort of other fish. Whoa, I am not a good artist. Okay, so some sort of other fish could be at negative 55. You could also have added like an airplane. Whoa, let's see, so an airplane that was, let's see, the elevation of the airplane was 150 feet above sea level. Okay, so you just needed to add something that was further from sea level than any of the other objects shown. And then you also needed to add your own object that is closer to sea level than any of the other objects shown. So you could have done like a little kid swimming, maybe at maybe they're swimming only 4 feet below the water surface, so that would be -4. And then you could have also added, I don't know, maybe like a balloon that just started to fly up in the air at 10 feet. The elevation of that balloon would be 10 feet. So hopefully you're able to come up with some of these on your own. For J, if the bird is directly above the fish, how far apart are the bird and the fish? Okay, so the bird is here, directly above the fish. Okay, what you need to pay attention to is that from here to here is 15 feet, and from here to here is 15 feet. So if you add those two together, they are exactly 30 feet apart. And then for K, if the bird continues flying in a straight path, how far apart will the bird and scuba diver be when the bird is directly above the scuba diver? So if we take this bird, I'm going to make its path pink. So if it flies in a straight path right here, so now we've got the bird right here, directly above the scuba diver. The distance from where the bird is to the surface of the water is 15. The distance from the surface of the water down to the scuba diver, the distance is 30 feet. So if we're trying to figure out how far apart they will be when the bird is directly above the scuba diver, we would say 45 feet, because 15 plus 30, they are this total distance right here. If the bird's right here and the scuba diver's here, the total distance would be 45 feet. Okay, so what I want you to do now is go to Alex, and you are going to complete the Alex assignment that is called Integers A. Okay, so after you've finished this video, after you've completed this activity number 1, I want you to go to the Alex, to log into Alex, and you are going to complete Integers A.